Every time we look at different tissues in this class, like skeletal tissue, muscular tissue, we find that textbooks and teachers like to refer to something called a functional unit. What is that? So in skeletal tissue, the functional unit was that little pillar of strength in osteon because it was the smallest unit of bone that displayed all of the characteristics of bone. And here in contractile muscle tissue, the tiniest unit that can create a contraction is something called a sarcomere. I like this figure right here because it shows you one big organ up in the top left corner, or one full skeletal muscle, and then it shows you one individual muscle fiber, which deceptively looks like one of the cylinder-shaped proteins that is also in it as well. And that's why I keep warning you to be careful of whether you're looking at a cylinder-shaped muscle fiber or a cylinder-shaped protein. So we know that muscle fibers are packed full of these myofibrils, which are basically just big long rods that are able to shorten to create a contraction. And now we're going to discover that there are distinct areas on a myofibril that creates a contraction. So, oh, that's wrong. This distinct area right here is a sarcomere. A sarcomere is defined at its outer limits by these zigzaggy lines that we conveniently call Z lines, right? So there's one on either side. And now, if you think, if we were to look at this big myofibril up here, we would see sarcomere after sarcomere after sarcomere after sarcomere just lined up all along this myofibril. Equidistant from each Z line in the very middle of a sarcomere is something that we conveniently call the M line. Who made these names, right? I'm sorry. Before we go any further, we should name some of the other things on this diagram. Just name them before we go any further. This thickened purple strip here, right? This is the thick filament full of myosin. This thin red twisty thing here is the thin filament, which is full of actin. And I'm sorry, I will put thick filament over here. And these coiled up little proteins that you see on either end, these coiled up little proteins, these are what are called elastin. There are some books and resources that will refer to this more specifically as titin. The H zone, let me get a highlighter here. The H zone is the area containing the M line up until the area where actin and myosin overlap, right? So it's the area containing the M line up until the area where actin and myosin overlap. That's the H zone. This picture's gonna get messy. So I bands can also be known as light bands. And these are bands or areas on a sarcomere where the strips or the band where actin and the elastic coiled up protein, where they overlap, but there is no myosin. So this area right here would be an I band. And this area right here would also be an I band. A bands, which are also called dark bands, they account for the remaining real estate that we've not highlighted in here on my terrible picture. But this would be an A band because this is where actin and myosin overlap. So would this. I encourage you to make a little list with definitions of these, things that say where actin and myosin overlap, where myosin does not overlap with anything. And I also encourage you to take this picture up here of the myofibril and try to label these bands and lines on the myofibril yourself. Doing that, really making that like redrawing, it really helps students be like, oh, okay, it's not exactly what I thought. This slide, it's always a little bit difficult for students to visualize. So if you have trouble with it, that's not you. It's okay. But this is really asking you to flex that skill of taking a 2D picture and really trying to think of what it would look like in a 3D representation. What I mean, for example, is like seeing a picture that looks like a triangular organ, but in reality, it's really a pyramid shape in the body. Right. So what we're doing here in this diagram is we are cutting this myofibril right here and right here and then right here. And what we're doing on these very bottom pictures down here, we're showing you like the cut face. If we were to cut that myofibril and look at the circular face of it. In fact, before even looking at the diagrams at the bottom, take a look at the right end of the myofibril up in the top corner of the picture. And you can see some purple dots, right? Those are myosin fibers coming at you. And then you can see the relationship between those and the orientation of the structure that has like a 3D cylinder shape. And I guess I should just remind you that a myofibril is just one cylinder-shaped protein that has hundreds of sarcomeres on it. And it's one of hundreds of cylinder-shaped muscle fibers that are in one muscle. So when students come to me and they say, where is the sarcomere? I'm like, oh, honey, I don't say that. I say there's thousands of them doing this. So, okay, so now take a look at the cross sections on the bottom of this picture. What they contain is a visual representation of your definitions for the I band, A band, and H band, right? Here's the I band right here. Here's the M line or H band right here, it's labeled. And then this is showing you the contents of an A band. In the H zone, that's where we say that there's only myosin. And we can see here in this picture down here, yes, there is only myosin here, right? There are just these purple dots, which is all myosin. In the I band, we say that that's where actin and elastin is. Yes, I see that. There is actin and elastin right there, right? And then in the zone of overlap, or the A band, which is actually the most important zone to us, in the zone of overlap, we said that there was both actin and myosin. And you can see that in the zone of overlap. So when we look at these cross sections, they look so different than how we draw that sarcomere there from Z line to Z line. And the H bands, the A bands, the I bands, they look very different in cross section. I think this is one of the first times in this class we're looking at these structures in a longitudinal section. And that's what this picture is right here, longitudinal. And then these pictures down here are us looking at a myofibril in a transverse section.